Kind of like the Army, hurry up and wait.
Now, is this you ask questions type
Yes.
thing?
Yeah.
Right?
All right. All right. We're talking today with Mr. Paul Lecours of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Lecours, can you begin with a little bit of background on yourself? Let's start with where and when you were born.
Well, I was born in Lebanon, New Hampshire, very conservative society back in 1946.
And did you grow up there?
Yes.
Okay. And what did your family do for a living?
Well, my dad worked as a salesperson in a furniture store, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom.
Okay. And how many kids were in the family?
2. It
All
was
right.
just my sister and I.
All right. And what kind of education did you have?
Well, my sophomore year of college, I got mono and had to get out of school, so, you know, that took care of that. I was, you know, I was home, and sure enough, when it was non-contagious and I could finally do something, then I was staring. I knew I'd probably get drafted, or actually the thing was that I'd have to start 4 out of 6 courses midterm. And I thought, oh, I need to slow down, you know, so I joined the military. My dad was in the Air Force, so I joined the Air Force.
All right.
And
what school had you been going to?
St. Anselm's College, liberal arts school in the East Coast. And then I picked courses up when I was in the service.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
All right. So basically you were, now, had you been considering going into the service all along, or?
No, this is the 60s. I mean, you know, if you weren't in school and you were breathing and you could walk and talk and chew gum at the same time, you're going to get drafted. And I had no desire to go in the Army. You know, no offense to the Army guys, but I really, you know, the Air Force was something that appealed to me. And I did need to slow down, so that's what I joined the military.
Did you have any idea of what you wanted to do in the Air Force, or were you just going to go where they sent you?
Well, my major was going to be psychology, so I said I wanted to work with people's problems, right? So they go, oh, personnel. So anyway, I took this test, and I can't explain. I just retain numbers. I mean, I do math in my head. So anyway, I got this math test, and you know, I mean, I'm done way before the final. You know, the clock went off. You know, I was done a long time before that. Next thing I know, I'm in accounting and finance, working in military pay.
All right.
It was really bizarre. But I was in charge of an area at Kinchel up in Sault Ste. Marie within 6 months because I memorized all the codes. But
Right. Okay.
that
So
was weird.
let's go back here. You've gone. You've enlisted. Where do you report to first when you enlist? Where did you go first?
Well, I went to Lackland, you know, Air Force Base for basic training. Yeah.
And what did that consist of at that point in time?
What
did you do in training?
Basically, what they did is ran you all over the place. And the fat guys had to run everywhere. Now, I was skinny as a rail back then. You wouldn't know it today, but the bottom line was the fat guys ran, the other guys, we did a lot of drilling and, of course, the obstacle courses and a lot of calisthenics, I mean, to put you in shape. But it was Air Force, so you got 6 weeks. Then when I went to Sault Ste. Marie, there were 2 additional weeks of basic training that we had to have. Or maybe it was 6 weeks and then two additional. But the bottom line was I was in great shape. And first day out, we ran 2 miles and I beat the trainer. And I'll never forget this, John Carter. I'll never forget this guy. He had like a 32-inch waist, you know, strong. He said, oh, you want to beat me? You're in charge of calisthenics. Well, I had to do them anyway, so. But it was fun. And they put you in relatively good shape.
Okay. Now, how much emphasis did they put on military discipline when you were in basic?
Big time. Very, you know, I can remember anticipating a right turn, and the guy said left, you know, and I ran into a guy. Oh my gosh, the guy walks up and punches me in the nose. I'll never forget that as long as I live, you know. That's another story. Because when he transferred on the base in Vietnam, he didn't even exist in the military an hour later, you know. And I didn't do it, but it was just the idea that he must have crossed a lot of people. But discipline was vital. I mean, you can't sit there and question orders. You just don't do that. And they break you down and build you up, you know that.
Okay. Well, certainly as an adult, you've got a fairly strong and independent mind. Did you have any trouble making the transition to military discipline when you got there?
No.
Okay.
not at all.
So it made sense to you and you just did it?
Yep, all very logical.
All right.
You know.
Okay. So they send you then, you go out of basic, your first station then is Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan?
Yes, sir.
And what's the name of the base up there?
That was Kinchlow.
Okay. And what what kind of base was it? What were they doing up there?
SAC base. They like B-52s, but there was supposedly was to protect the locks, but it was also the closest base for a direct hit on Russia was the Sioux. And I lucked out and was able to work at NORAD command center for NORAD alerts, and that was interesting. That was very fascinating.
Well, tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what was the work like, or what were you doing?
They'd call an alert. You're on the base, and I lived off the base. But man, I can't tell you, just hauled. I mean, I'd get in the command center, and everybody was, when they were on alert, they just activate everybody just as though you're, taking off. And my job was plotting radioactivity. That's no secret anymore. I don't think that's any big deal, but that's. That was kind of illogical to me to have to plot radioactivity. It was like, okay, whatever.
Well, would this be radioactivity if somebody went and blew up a bomb on
If
top
somebody
of us?
dropped a bomb, you'd have to plot how long for the radioactivity to go from the west coast to the east coast or whatever. X number of miles, and I mean, if you think about it, it's really kind of dumb. I mean, I thought at the time, of course, that in the Cold War, it's a different world.
All right. Now, during what were the approximate dates when you were up there?
I was there from approximately, I got there just before the bridge walk. The week before the bridge walk, because somebody said, "You want to walk Mackinac Bridge?" What's Mackinac, But anyway, so I got there. It had to be like end of May, early June, or was it June rather? Because I got in May 15th, so
okay.
Yeah, it was in June of '66, and.
Then how long did you spend up there?
I was there until December of '67. Then I went home on leave January '68. I was in Vietnam.
All right. Over the course of the time that you spent up in Sault Ste. Marie, were there any sort of serious alerts, or were there moments when they thought something big might happen, or did you just do drills?
No, they're just drills. I mean, to my knowledge, I don't know. They just tell you to do something, you do it. It's just the way it is.
Okay. What was sort of daily life like up there?
Well, in New Hampshire, Lebanon, New Hampshire would be the coldest spot in the nation 3 or 4 times a year. I mean, it's just the way it was. And to go to school at 30 below, 20 below is no big deal. I mean, it's part of life. But we didn't have wind chill, so I really didn't know what wind chill was because we're in a valley. So when they handed out parkas, I thought, you guys don't know what cold is. And I thought it was a joke. In the first storm, I didn't even make it as far as to the next barracks. And I went back and got my parka. It was cold. I mean, the winters were really cold. There was an alert one time, and to actually get into the base, it was so foggy. We had a guy sitting on the bumper of the car, literally telling us where to go. We couldn't see, But I loved it. I mean, the people were awesome. They were really awesome, and it was quite fascinating. It was a really great place to be, and the people made the Sioux.
You talking about the civilians or the people that you worked with, or
the people on the base, and the civilians. I mean, it's a whole different world up there. People are more real.
Now, were there a lot of people on the base who'd been there a long time? Were they mostly like you and just going in and out?
Well, yeah, pretty much. In the military, you're never anywhere, for any real great length of time. But, yeah, they were pretty much as a transient move. And they closed the base down, too. So I was in charge of the record transfer when they closed the base. So they moved everything to K.I. Sawyer and shut the base down, which, wasn't too long after that you saw businesses boarded up because the Sioux was so dependent on that military dollar, And it was too bad. I mean, that was kind of sad.
Now, did you go over to Sawyer yourself, or did you get transferred out by then?
No, by then, just before completing it, well, actually, just after the record transfer, I was sent my orders for Vietnam
All right. So that's sort of end of 67, so you leave Michigan, you go home, then from there you go out to Vietnam. How did they get you out to Vietnam physically? How did they take you there?
Well, we flew out of SeaTac in Washington State, and I mean, it was like 4 or 5 in the morning. It was a slight drizzle, and you really couldn't walk. I mean, it really wasn't anywhere to go from where we were. So I just kind of walked around the drizzle, and it was dark. I mean, everything was closed. I mean, when I flew in, it was late at night anyway, you know. So, but it was pretty much, I think, a straight shot from Logan to, you know, to Seattle.
Yeah, and then from Seattle, did you fly in military aircraft or civilian or?
Civilian, Braniff, believe it or not, I was a Braniff. My first trip over was, I believe it was Braniff.
Okay.
You know.
And was it chartered by the military or were you?
Right. Yeah, it was. A lot of chartered flights, yeah.
Okay. And then did they fly you straight to Vietnam from there, or did you stop somewhere?
We flew into, first trip I think we flew into Wake Island, and then from Wake into Cam Ranh Bay, you know. Second trip we went from Seattle to Hawaii, and then into Cam Ranh.
All right. Now you get into Cam Ranh the first time, you land there. What was your first impression of Vietnam when you got there?
Hot. It was like when they opened for basic. I mean, here it is, you know, I mean, you know, Hampshire, summer was 70 degrees, you know, and they opened the door when we landed in San Antonio. I thought it was a blast furnace, and then watch all these cockroaches. I mean, what the? Same deal in Vietnam. It was like, holy crap. I mean, it was hot, man. You know, I'm sitting there, that was my first view. And then coming out on the tarmac, and you're seeing the buildings, and you're seeing the women with their, you know, their native dress. And it's like, wow, you know, black pajamas, right, that scene. But it was, I don't know, it just really didn't, it's funny, you go over thinking it's a one-way trip. Right, and they opened it up, and it really didn't look that active. You know, there wasn't like there were a million people, and they put you in a room, and then they brief you on your tour. You know.
Okay. Now, what assignment did you get once you got there?
I was assigned, you know, to military pay section. I think it was. You know, technically, I mean, I was teaching accounting in Michigan. Believe it or not, when I was in the Sioux, it was funny. I was teaching these kids, and like I said, I never had a business course in my life. I just do numbers, you know, I just retain numbers. So I get over there, and I'm again assigned to military pay, and ended up working with the OSI. That was quite fascinating, but it was a really interesting tour, to say the least, you know.
Okay, let's try to sort of follow this a little bit in sequence. You get there, you get a briefing, then what do they do with you? They say, here's your job, here's your quarters. What happens?
Well, Air Force. You got to remember this Air Force. They give you an M16. They gave you, I don't even know if we got clips, to be honest with you. So then you get this, and then they take it away, store it, right? You have to store your weapons. You can't walk around with them, which I found kind of weird. And then basically you meet the people that you're working with, and you're working.
All right.
You know, it's just the way it is. It's just.
Okay. Physically, what kind of facility were you working in? Were you in permanent buildings or?
Well, it's like gosh, how would you describe this? It's like temporary. I mean, well, semi-permanent building. I mean, it wasn't like a Shangri-La office space. It was kind of crude offices, but they got the job done.
Okay.
You know.
Do they have air conditioning in these places?
You know, that's a good question. I don't even remember. I don't think we did.
Did you just
And
adjust to
honest,
the heat?
We must have, because of the records. You know, they probably did have air conditioning. I didn't think much of it, to be honest with you.
All right.
Because you're in heat. I mean, it's just the way it is. Yeah.
Okay. What kind of office setup did you have? How many people were you working with, or?
Well, in my section, it's in the back of the office, but there were 3 of us. And trying to think, it was like 3, 4 people.
And what did you spend your
And
time
then
doing?
they had, you know, several other people, you know, across the office.
Right. And what did you spend your time doing then when you're first there?
Oh gosh, handling pay records, answering pay inquiries, you know, processing the records for people that, shipped in.
Okay. So was this basically just sort of a day job? You check into work at a certain time, work X number of hours?
Yeah, pretty much. Air Force.
Mm-hmm. All right. And did you stay on the base or go off the base much, or?
Never went off the base. For 8 months, a restricted base. So for 8 months, I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my first trip off the base. It was trying to remember, but I think it may have been a money run or something. And they strap a sidearm on you, and you're supposed to be security to ship. They changed the MPCs. The money change is totally classified. It happens. You don't even know when it's going to, but it happens. You get on the plane. I think I flew into Saigon, and then they got like $2.5 million of script, and back on the plane, and here you are, just
now this kind of thing.
You work until all that money is replaced.
Right.
They bring the old money in, and you replace it for new, and then all that stuff's destroyed.
Okay. Now this is something that somebody who was there or knew how the military worked with them, they'd understand it. But what exactly was MPC, and how did that whole thing work?
Military pay script. Basically, what it is, it's instead of using cash like American money, they gave you military pay script. They gave you the money, we call it funny money, basically until you leave, and you trade your American money for this, money that you use in the Vietnamese economy.
Okay, so you could use it and pay
On the
Vietnamese
base
for things, and then would the Vietnamese use that money and trade it back and forth?
Well, technically they had their own, but they love to get a hold of MPC because it's worth more. Basically on the economy, it was worth more money.
And then, but they would change over the money. They'd take out one color to replace with another.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would happen overnight.
And why would they do that?
Well, because they don't want it counterfeited. And that's basically the reason. It was a security thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, would there be people who would try to play the market or exchanges or find ways to profit by that kind of thing?
Oh, sure. Vietnamese did that all the time, because they could get more, more for the, American money would buy more Vietnamese currency. So, because it was worth more. It's like the dollar might be worth $2 in their money. It's like world currency, how it fluctuates, but.
Yeah, when there's opportunity, some people will go and take it. All right. Now, did you have much contact with any Vietnamese civilians or military while you were living on the base?
Well, we had a mama san who cleaned our hooch, and she'd bring her daughter in, baby son, once in a while to help her. Daughter was like 16 maybe. Mama san was 33, looked 80. But the bottom line, they age fast, but. That was your contact, and then people who worked on the base, of course. I had somebody who worked in one of the health facilities that invited me to her home, and that was kind of neat,
Okay. Now, on some of the bases in Vietnam, there were often real security concerns about the Vietnamese and so forth who came and worked there or what they might do. Now, was Cam Ranh a relatively safe place to be working?
Cam Ranh Bay was very secure. It had never been hit. And I always said, well, you wait till when I'm going down the flight line, that'll be the first time it gets hit. Well, it was less than 30 days, but that's, of course, just before Tet. So then they started hitting Cam Ranh too. But see, Cam Ranh Bay had the busiest hospital at the height of the war. That was the Air Force area. Then you had the Army, and that was primarily bringing supplies. Then you had the Navy. And Navy must have been also for supplies too. That could have been. It was the deepest natural harbor in the world, basically. And we were talking about bringing dependence in ultimately. Beautiful. Cam Ranh Bay was absolutely phenomenal. Our beaches were better than Waikiki. It's just the way it is. Because guys would go and meet their wives in Hawaii, and they come back, beaches are nicer than that, it's just the way it is,
All right. Now, your assignment or your duties shifted over the course of the time that you were in Vietnam. You start out handling pay and so forth, but then you get involved in some other things?
Well, I kind of walked into a case that I was investigating a doctor in the hospital. I ended up working with the OSI on this investigation.
And what's the OSI?
Office of Special Investigations. And that was kind of a neat aside, It was kind of a neat situation. It's something you walk into. I mean, I have God things happen to me all the time. I walk into things. I can't help it. But the whole goal of what I tried to do in the service is to get to Germany. I volunteered for Germany and France, Germany and Guam, Germany and Vietnam. Don't have to tell you what I got, right?
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, when I was out of the military, this trial took place in Bitburg, Germany, and the government flew me there for testifying in the trial for the Vietnamese portion of the investigation. That was awesome. I mean, who would connect the two, right? But ultimately, this God thing, right, this element, it ended up getting me to Germany, what I ultimately wanted to do, and I love Germany. But it was fascinating. It was really, and people had no idea what I was doing, which was kind of neat.
Describe a little bit what kind of work you were doing.
Well, basically, I really, I'm kind of torn because I had to take this oath that I wouldn't discuss anything about this, but the trial took place, so I really don't know if it matters. But basically what happened was there was a corrupted individual who happened to be a doctor. And so anyway, they had to get proof that this man basically was pulling some of the deals he was. And that's basically what I came in. And so anyway, I go over to the hospital, and nobody knew where the heck I was going, but it was kind of interesting because you go there, and I made contact with another doctor who was a neurosurgeon, and just the antithesis of this guy. This guy was so dedicated, he was so awesome, and he talked to me going to med school. I had full run the medical library. So anyway, I went to the hospital quite a few times, obviously, and so anyway, that ended up being a diversion from normal duties.
Okay. And now, did you have some kind of cover for going to the hospital, or did you just walk over there because it was there, or?
What do you mean?
Well, you were assigned to be investigating this one person, but were you?
Well, yeah, but you just play. You're just playing a role. You're playing yourself.
Okay. Now, did you have work to do at the hospital? I mean, did you have stuff relating to accounting or managing pay or things like that?
No, not at all.
All right.
No. That wasn't my bailiwick.
All right. Now, did you get involved in other investigations while you were there, or just did that one thing that one time?
No, they wanted to investigate the finance operation, and I was sleeping through rocket attacks. I figured it was time to go home, so I set this other kid up for that. We always wondered why why you could leave the office, but the bottom line was this kid was so cool. I mean, he really did get the job done. 30 days later, I checked in Washington. This kid they had already arrested one person, from the finance operation. It was like, man, I mean, I knew this kid was sharp, but I didn't realize how quick he was. But they may have been investigating over time, too. I don't know. I just knew when they asked me, no, this is going to be too involved, and I just didn't want to get stuck there any longer. I just couldn't deal with it.
Okay. You said, Hudson, you're there at the point when the Tet Offensive actually starts. To what extent did things change on the base around that time?
Well, I think security tightened a little bit, but, Air Force, right? This is the way it is. This one guy was short. That means he had less than 30 days to go home. So anyway, we're sitting on these makeshift benches that, these long, wooden benches where you'd sit there and you could watch a movie. It was like watching an outdoor movie, right? Well, that's what it was, an outdoor movie. But one night, we're sitting, I hear this, turned around, there was, fire, flames just shooting right up in the air. What had happened, there were 8 rounds came in. They hit 3 fuel bladders, and they were near the flight line. So from where we were, it's probably, 2 miles or a mile to the flight line. And I'm looking back, and I'm seeing all this fire, and I said, we're getting hit. This guy goes, I've told you a million times we're not going to get hit. We got you used to talk about how we had the rocks protecting us in the Army, so I said, well, whatever, check it out. So he turns around, he sees the flames, he goes, what do we do? I don't know, wait for the alarm to go off. And then sure enough, not even 10 seconds later, the movie goes out, the siren goes off, and so we went back to the hooch, shut the lights off, put on our flak jackets, helmets, and popped a beer. Air Force.
Did you have...
Because remember, we had no weapons.
Yeah. Now, did you have dugouts or bunkers that you could go into, or had they not provided those?
Well, I shouldn't say that. There were bunkers, around the outside of the base where you did security. You know, if you're called out to a bunker, you, of course, use that bunker for protection. But as far as the hooch, when we were getting hit, you put your flak jacket and helmet and went down under your bunk. I mean, duh. I mean, if you have a direct round come in, I mean, it doesn't matter, you know, I mean, what's the point in it? But that was basically, that was the Air Force plan of,
all right. Well, were you in an area that wasn't a terribly likely target anyway? I mean, not much to
well,
blow
it's a
up?
housing area, there's not much, you know, what's the point in hitting the housing area? I think rockets came in once when I was there. I think they may have come close once. You know.
Okay. Now, once you were there you said you were pretty much on the base for the first 8 months. But then after that, did you go anyplace else or see anything else?
Well, after that, I got R&R to Australia. Also, when I flew back after my first tour, because I extended for a second tour, but when I flew back, I went to Japan. We landed in Tokyo. Other than that, I just went went to Nha Trang. That was hop in a Jeep and go to Nha Trang, and there's basically go to the beaches. But other than that, just Saigon and Nha Trang. That's me personally. That's the only 2 places I went. You know, other than Australia. I went to Australia twice. I loved it.
All right. So when you went to Saigon, what were you going for?
Well, to be honest with you, the first time I think was a money run. Second time I went to see a friend I was stationed in Michigan with. But I went with another guy who, this is his 3rd tour, but he knew somebody and some Chinese people in Saigon. So we ended up in Cholon area after curfew, which really was exciting. I mean, didn't need that because you could hear people firing weapons, you know. I mean, you could hear it outside the door, and I was like, we were stuck there overnight, but the guy knew the people, so you're laying on the floor watching these lizards going up and down the wall, you know. I'll never forget, but you couldn't go anywhere, they'd shoot you, you know. So.
Well, I mean, when you went from Cam Ranh somewhere else, would you fly there or drive there, or what did you do?
Fly.
Okay.
Well, except for Nha Trang, obviously. Nha Trang was just a few miles away, so that was just a Jeep.
Okay. Now, what did Saigon look like to you when you were there?
It's kind of interesting. It's like a metropolitan city, basically, with a lot of people. I mean, that's the way it struck me. I mean, it wasn't New York, but, you know, a lot of hustle and bustle. I mean, it's just astounding, the numbers of people and the cyclo bikes. And I remember getting on a cyclo bike. It's a guy that, you know, pedals you around in a, you know, a little thing that he pulls. But anyway, we stopped in front of the embassy in Saigon. He said, "Move that bike!" I mean, you hear it, and you can see the machine gun nest, and you're going, "Damn!" And I'm in the uniform, right? And the guy said, "Move it now!" I mean, just no qualms about it. It just off we went, you know, couldn't stop. And then you got to see the Vietnamese embassy, or palace, I should say. But the thing was, it's astounding to see the tanks and stuff. I mean, it's definitely an armed city, but it's really kind of interesting that you could go into this city. It's in the middle of a war zone, go to the Continental Hotel and have a great meal. You know. Then I went up to a man, and it's kind of obvious. I mean, he was tall and white, and he had the garb of a doorman, you know, at one of the hotels, and you got to speak to him in French, which is kind of unique. Ask him where the bathroom was, you know, and whipped the old French out, and he was a holdover from when the French were there. It was really kind of fascinating, to be honest with you, but you know, you don't expect that. I mean, I didn't expect to see something like that, so it was really quite amazing in a lot of ways.
Now, you talked about going into sort of Cholon, so that's sort of a different neighborhood, or is it outside
That
of the
was the
city?
Chinese section of Saigon.
All right. And when people were shooting at each other, was that criminal activity or Viet Cong activity, or have you no idea?
War's criminal.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to sit and think about it, you know.
But you have people who maybe are simply profiteering, or they're doing drugs or prostitution or just organized crime kind of stuff in the conventional sense. And then there's the political side of it where they're going after certain people or...
Well, that basically, they just don't want, you just didn't have, you had a curfew. People weren't supposed to be out. You know, it's just
So even
way
the
it
police
was.
could be shooting at you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, was it kind of strange going from one place to another, and one place that seems very secure, and one place with lizards on the ceiling where you're hiding? I mean, was it a little hard to adjust to, or did you just kind of go along
Well,
with
it's
it?
their culture. I mean, it's just the way it is. You know, you can't, I mean, I can't tell you how many times you hear it Americans, oh, why don't they learn how to speak English? Well, hell, you know, we've been here 7 years. Why don't they learn how to speak? And that was one phrase I heard one day. And I said, why don't you learn how to speak Vietnamese? I mean, what's wrong with this country? You know, are we that stupid? We go into places and you wonder why, you know, people hate Americans. Acclimate yourself. Become part of their culture. Learn about their culture. I mean, it's amazing the number of languages you can pick up if you try, you know, just care enough about the people to do that. And, I mean, I knew enough Vietnamese to, you know, keep myself out of trouble, you know.
Now, how did you learn Vietnamese? Was
From people, from Mama Sans and, you know, people that worked on the base, that sort of thing.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you signed on for a second tour. So, in terms of...
Well, this investigation wasn't done. I mean, so we're almost there, but, you know, still there's more work to be done. So that's basically why I extended my tour. And plus, I think the other thing was, the overriding factor was I could be home for Christmas. And every Christmas we had a family reunion. But I could be home. I had 30 days anywhere in the world. So the thing is, I could be home for Christmas. And I heard people were drunk for 2 weeks, you know, Christmas and New Year's. And I just didn't want that, to be in that environment. So, you know, that was another inducement. And so I came back, got my job done, and, you know, then went back to D.C. Well, not back, but it was assigned to Washington.
So how long was the second stint then in Vietnam? That
6 months.
Okay. So you weren't really, you were on there for a full extra year. You were just in there for a term to finish the job you were working on.
If you extend, you get 6 month extension. It's not a year extension, you know. It's not like you add another year, you add another 6 months, then if you go again, you add another 6 months. I mean, they've got to know that there's only so, you know, at some point in time, it gets to be too much, you know. Okay. I would think. I have no idea. I can't. I'm Air Force. You got to understand. Different world, you know.
Yeah. Now, was it after you went home for Christmas? Was it hard to go back?
Yeah, in a way. But you know, again, it's not like you have a choice. You know, you just go back.
On the other side, when you went home for Christmas, sort of what were the approximate dates? Was it Christmas of '68?
Oh gosh.
Because I guess you were in Vietnam just in time for Tet early in '68. So it's probably the end of that year when you go home.
Well, it was the end of that year, and then '69, January '69 when I got back.
And when you got there, I mean, did you notice sort of anti-war sentiment or protests or anything like that?
No.
You didn't really see any of that yourself?
New Hampshire's like being off. I mean, just, that's 3 years behind everybody else at the time, you know. We're a different society back then. Very conservative, not as liberal like it is today, but you know, I'm saying the East Coast become more liberal than it was when I grew up. But I don't know, it's just that little neck of the world, and you know, people weren't going crazy, you know, to my knowledge anyway. I didn't see it. Okay. But then again, I was in Lebanon, New Hampshire, and then went straight north up to near the Canadian border. You don't have a lot of people there.
Right.
So who's going to protest? The mayor and his daughter, you know?
Yeah.
You know.
So you're kind of away from it. But you weren't watching a whole lot of television news or things like that, or seeing other things where some of that stuff would be up in the air. Now, while you were in the service at this point, especially in Vietnam, I mean, did you pay much attention to news from home or the political stuff going on? Because '68 was a pretty turbulent year.
Well, it's kind of ironic because I sent a letter to the Manchester Union Leader, which is the most conservative newspaper, I think, in the country. But William Loeb, I'll never forget that. But anyway, so I wrote to the paper and I basically said, what the heck are we doing over here? I mean, I've got a a copy in my file at home, but basically what it said was, what are we doing here? You got race riots in the United States. You got kids, taking over
college campuses, yeah.
College campus. I mean, it was bizarre to me. I said, what the heck are we doing here? We need to be home. Let's police our own environment. I mean, in essence, because this doesn't even make sense. It just doesn't make sense to me. I got an award for the best untitled letter to the editor award from Freedom Valley Foundation in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. I'll never forget that. I never even went to the awards bank. I could care less, But still, what the heck are we doing here?
So when you were there in Vietnam, you didn't have any very good idea of why you were there?
Well, I went over. I mean, it's like you're born in a country and you've been given freedom. It's not like you're sitting there with the SS in your back door. Well, there's a cost for freedom, and I think back then you didn't question it, is your country right or wrong? I mean, there was a sense of patriotism.
So you were going because it was your duty and you were sent there.
Sure, it's duty. I mean, wasn't it in World War II? People didn't back away from enlisting. It's just, and then whether they were, drafted or not, really didn't matter. They went willingly because it was an honor. And I think there was some degree of that sense of nationalism back in the 60s too. And I basically just said to my dad, we had a heck of an argument Christmas Eve. It was kind of funny because my best friend in Vietnam, one of my best friends, the black guy from Chicago. And honest to God, we could have traded houses. We had the same argument in both houses on Christmas Eve. It was like, you got to be kidding. And it was simply, why'd you volunteer? It's political war. And I just said, hey, you had your war, we have ours. I don't believe the papers, let's see firsthand what's going on, And that was, I think there was a curiosity there, but I still think that's an obligation,
But in terms of, but you weren't really thinking of it in sort of a military situation picture, or what are we trying to actually achieve here, or are we working towards some clear goal?
Well, what was the story? We're trying to stop communism, because if the domino effect will take place, they'll be everywhere. Well, dumb me. That makes sense,
Yeah.
They got to be there for a reason, right? Everything happens for a reason.
All right. So you kind of, so in a way, going back, you're at least going back to something where you sort of knew what the rules were, or because you'd gone back home, people didn't kind of get what you were doing or why you were doing it.
But the thing, you mean as far as going back?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you know what you're going back to. It's just the way it is, But it's not like you're going to go to Canada. Who wants to give up their family?
Well, most didn't.
And so yeah, it's just, I went back. The first time I just thought it was a one-way trip. Second time I really didn't have that feeling, because I felt more secure that, we're at least got some protection. They'd still hammer you once in a while. We had Sappers come on the base. There was a nurse writing, she was writing letters home, and Sapper opened the door, threw a satchel charge in, and just landed right at the end of her bed. And all she could do was look at it, and thank God it was a dud. But I think that night, I'm trying to remember, but that night I think the only casualty was a Korean that was in the hospital. He lost his legs, but he must have seen, the VC, because he dragged himself. They realized when they got his body, he dragged himself out of bed, was going after the Sappers, But it's just the way it is, It's like I almost tripped over a gook one night. Come back from the flight line, it was dark, and his black pajamas, and I just went, Choco Mignon, and kept walking, and years later I thought, darn, he wasn't supposed to be on the base after dark. He was checking where the planes were, to drop mortars in, But, rockets, whatever. But the thing was, I didn't even think about it at the time. It was like, I remember what time, it was like 4:30 or something in the morning. I was coming back from, it was either that or 8 o'clock at night. I don't even remember. I was coming back from duty on the flight line. Oh my gosh, can you imagine almost tripping over a guy and then not even thinking that, I didn't have a weapon. What was I going to do with him? Slap his face? I mean, this airport, you know.
Okay. They said duty on the flight line. What was it? Guard duty or?
No, I was just out there working at the I don't know what you want to call it. It's a pilot's facility where they get to grab a bite to eat, you know, if they have to on the run. But it's kind of interesting. They was in a bunker out there. You know, I've been out there a couple of times for alerts in a bunker. That was that was insane. I mean, you got this field, right? And then you got this grade that goes down. Our bunker was here. Now, think about it. If they had actually come across that field, Charlie comes flying across the field, you might shoot the first 2 or 3 of them. They're just going to haul back and lob a grenade. And here we're down here, so it's kind of obvious. You know, we can't see them anyway.
So you don't have a field of fire. You can't you can't see them.
But thank God, you know, when I was there, you know, I never had to go out in a bunker when Charlie was running across the field. I don't know if it ever happened until after I left, but.
Now, did they have much success mortaring or rocketing the place? Aside from the first time when they hit the fuel, do you think they would actually get some good coordinates and use them to hit the aircraft or whatever?
You know, who knows? I mean, they'd hit something once. They might hit something once in a while, but it's just part of the game, you know. Most of the time what happened was if they were afraid, intelligence thought there was a base that was going to get hit, they'd fly the planes into Cam Ranh Bay and put them on our flight line because we had the Koreans were guarding the shoreline. We had a White Horse division in the Trang, but I mean, we had a lot of security.
What impression did you have of the Korean soldiers?
They were awesome. I mean, they were fighting a war. They weren't like us. I mean, we'd go in and give them soap. They can clean their water buffalo and take care of their illnesses and stuff, and then go out and hit a minefield. And you know, Koreans they did a 2-week sweep and they brought back 2 prisoners. You know, and enough stuff. I mean, there was enough explosives and supplies to just wipe that base right off. I mean, it was amazing when I saw. And the first time I ever saw the hammock that they use. I mean, they put it in their pocket and then they spread it out between trees. You know, they're real small and lightweight. I mean, just so functional. It's ridiculous. Their uniforms are better than ours. Your lightweight jungle uniforms, darn, man, these people are well equipped, you know. But the Koreans, you know, if they brought back a prisoner, he was talking. But I remember they lost one of their men. So they came back and they strung up, I think it was 4 or 6 Vietnamese, you know, VC, maybe even just Vietnamese, I have no idea. But they strung them up on the concertina wire around their facility. And they just strung them up alive and just kept them there. Let them die, you know, it's just the way it is. But that was their message, you know, you don't kill our people, you know.
Yeah. Did you have any sense over the course of the time that you were in Vietnam that much was actually changing in the war, or was it just pretty much all the same from one end to the other?
What do you mean?
Well, like, was it going to end, or was someone going to win or lose, or was it just going to go on like that?
It's kind of interesting because I think the thing is the average Vietnamese, right? He's just trying to live his life. And he's got a VC that, you know, if it was the mayor or a teacher or somebody with any intelligence, the VC kill him. So what do? Do you deal with these wonderful Americans, you know, the nice guys, or do you avoid getting killed by the bad guys? I mean, they're torn in the middle. And I think what happened over the course of time is, you know, our problem is, you know, we go into a situation believing we're right in what we're doing, but in time it wears you down. And I think what happens is you've got Vietnamese who are committed. I mean, their heart and soul are committed to defeating the enemy, and we're there because it's, you know, we're sent there and it's a job. You know, but I just don't think there's any way to win those wars. If you don't fight them, what's the point in going up a hill one day, you know, lose 3 or 4 men, abandon the hill. 2 weeks later, back up the same stupid hill. I mean, what do you think that does to people? You know, oh, it don't mean nothing. You know, that's a phrase you heard. The phrase I heard, fat, thin, tall, short, people from all rich, poor, I mean, all walks of life. The phrase I heard so often was, whatever patriotism I ever had, I've lost it since I've been here. And I heard that quite a few times. And it really was from different people. And you sit there and you go, wow, you know.
So that's an indicator that you got certainly some kinds of morale issues. On the
sure.
whole, on the base of the people that you were working with, how would you characterize the morale there?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, were people basically doing their jobs and trying to do them well and get
Air
stuff
Force.
done?
Air Force.
Yeah.
It's a different world, you know. But I think basically the Air Force is the job. You do your job. That's just the way it is, you know. And yeah, I think it does wear you down sometimes. You know, especially going in the hospital. It's like, I mean,
Now,
how do you describe it? You know, when you see a nurse break down or I mean, I don't know. I think back, I look aside, I can see some of the things, even to this day, but it really, you know, is why are we the policemen of the world? And that makes sense. I mean, I studied war for a year when I was in high school and did this term papers for this school year. And I remember things saying like, you know, war's a game man so loves to play. And then I get in the military. Oh my gosh, you know, isn't it the truth? You know, you sit there and say, what's the whole point of this? You know, let's ship them up the hill tomorrow again? Are you idiots? Either we fight the war or we don't. You know, if we're going to fight the war, let's go north. You know, it's like MacArthur. Well, we'll stop at the 48th parallel, right? Wasn't that it?
Well, they had
68 or
actually,
40?
well, the question was really whether or not you really wanted to bring the Chinese in, and he didn't think they were going to fight, and he was kind of wrong.
Probably.
The other issue was sort of always World War III, is that you have all kinds of factors shaping and controlling it. But in the meantime, you got the bigger political issues about why you're there and what you can do and you can't do, and it's these soldiers and the people on the ground kind of caught in the middle of it and just have to make do with what they've got. And that's kind of what sounds like where a lot of you guys were.
Yeah, but think about it. You know, think of how asinine it is. Rules of engagement. You think the VC went on and said, Americans, we're here. Can we, you know, don't shoot at us. I mean, we sit there, halt, dung, lie 3 times. Then you fire a warning shot. Then you can shoot at them if they're still coming towards you, unless you've been fired on. You know, the Sappers that came on the base one night were in the sights of Snoopy, you know, which was a converted 131. But the thing was, they had them in their sights.
Right.
They asked for permission to fire, and they said, permission denied until fired upon. Come on, these are the guys who just bomb, you know, drop satchel charges in your base, and you have to ask permission to kill them. You're going to want them to come back tomorrow? I mean, are you people nuts? And isn't that what we're still doing today? I mean,
well, they try to refine it and make it better, but you have somebody in an office making a rule someplace and someone else trying to enforce it. You know.
Well, they do a good job, don't they?
Well,
I mean, I'm sorry, I was stationed in Washington with my last assignment. They're nuts.
okay.
Yeah.
Now, are there other particular incidents or memories that are going to stand out in your mind about Vietnam that you want to add to the record here before we move you out of Vietnam?
I don't know. I just, you know, I think the whole experience is, like I say, you go over thinking it's a one-way trip, you know. And I remember a Continental flight where, oh, these stewardesses were awesome. And they were serving everybody. And I don't think there was, I think every one of them was a 10. All I remember is they were taking care of these people, and I walked back to this girl, and she was from California, a beautiful blonde girl, and I said, you know, Khalil Gibran said, beauty is a thing perceived, it's not a light in the heart. And you guys have given selflessly to make sure that all these men, you know, are taken care of and made comfortable. And you know, some of these guys aren't coming back. You're going to be the last thing they'll remember. And I think that's really, you know, I think you're really beautiful people.
All right.
But I can't think, you know, other than that, you know, going to Australia, I loved Australia.
Okay.
I mean, but, you know, other than that, really to sit and think in terms of what stands out in your mind about Vietnam is, I think the futility of it is basically, if you were to say something, so, you know, it just, you know, it just didn't matter. It just, I know, it just seemed real futile to me. I mean, we weren't fighting it, you know. It just seemed like there's no way to win. You know, the way we were doing it, just wasn't a way to win the war. I guess that was the futility of it all. You sit there and you thought, you know, my country right or wrong, and then you get there and you go, you know, what's the point? We're not fighting it, you know. Halt, dung lie 3 times. You crazy? They did a practice alert one time, and this guy was a Marine, and he was trying to sneak up behind. Sound magnifies stuff 1,000 times when it's dark and it's getting quiet. And I heard this guy, and I said, halt, dung lie. And you're supposed to do it 3 times, then you can pull, the bolt back and jam a cartridge in the. I was pulling back the minute I said the first one. This guy jumps out and goes, friendly forces, friendly forces. Honest to God, I thought the guy was going to crap his drawers. But you know, though, the thing was, there was no halt, dung lie with us. I mean, just, most of the guys they weren't playing that game, you know. But the fact that you were given these rules, that was kind of a shocker for me, you know.
Yeah, but people ran into that quite a bit.
But I love it. I mean, to this day, I'd probably go back. I enjoyed the people, because I watch kids play and happy with nothing, you know, and I sit there and look at our kids, you know. Come on,
that's quite a bit different. All right. And certainly by way of contrast, and your next assignment after Vietnam was to Washington, D.C.?
Headquarters Command in Washington,
Okay.
yeah. Highest command in the military.
So
That'd be my best assignment. I thought that would be great. I mean, you can't, that's just the way it is. You can't get any higher, you know.
So were you in Washington or at the Pentagon or where?
Well, I was at Bowling Air Force Base, is where I was assigned. First thing that struck me was the Officers Club at Bowling was one of the top 10 architectural wonders in the world. I mean, seriously, talk about, culture shock, going from Hampshire to Vietnam to Washington. It was like, give me a break, you know.
Now, what did your job consist of in Washington?
Primarily military pay again, same type of deal. Back to the old, back to the normal, you know.
All right, and we can talk a little bit about what made working there different from being either at Sault Ste. Marie or at Cam Ranh or whatever.
I know Washington was. I think the thing is, you get there after going to Vietnam, you want some answers, and you go up to Capitol Hill and find out these idiots can't answer a question with a yes or no if their lives depended on it. And the shocker was to go to a guy named Tom McIntyre, known to be a straight shooter, a lot of common sense, senator from New Hampshire. And you got to remember, this is a conservative society. You expect somebody with conservative thinking. So I went into his office, and every time he had to answer something, guess what? I'd ask him a question, he'd go to his file cabinet and pull out a newsletter. I'm like, this is a straight shooter? I mean, this is a guy who can answer a question with a yes or no. It wasn't happening. It was just, and I found pretty much they're all like that. And very wasteful society. I mean, it's just, they just blow money like it's nothing, you know.
Right.
And I wasn't prepared for that, to be honest with you. I wasn't prepared for the waste. Yeah.
All right. Well, how long did you stay in Washington?
I was there from July to March.
Okay, so kind of 69 into 70.
Yeah. 69, 70.
All right.
But what was funny, this Captain Seda, he was funny. A little short guy. And anyway, he comes running in. He had been in Vietnam, but anyway, he was a officer for, I don't know if it was headquarters group there or what it was. I just remember running into my office, and that in itself was funny. Just watching him running into my office and say, "Oh, you won't believe who I got a call from." And remember this is 30 days later. But it was this guy had been arrested. Remember that kid I was talking about earlier? It was like, man, I knew he was sharp, but this is less than, this is amazing. This 30 days and the guy's in the Briggs already. He's already in jail. I don't know what else happened, but that was astounding.
All right. Now, what kind of people were you working with? Were you just in an office with other non-coms, or did you work with a lot of officers there? Or?
Well, predominantly, it was people my own, my own rank or less, basically. Because I remember I had 2 women that I was in charge of too. Besides, I guess there were a couple of guys there too. A guy from Tennessee and another guy from Pennsylvania. And I'll never forget it, taking this one girl out to dinner. And she was just a hard worker, really neat girl. And coming back and getting flack from the other one. I mean, I'm just a kid. Give me a break. How do I know about, managing women? Give me a break. That kind of threw me, because they didn't have women in Vietnam, obviously, but I mean, not in our capacity. They had nurses, Red Cross, but that was it. But now, I had never imagined, I never expected that. It's just the way it was. And I think in Washington, I guess the thing that there was this colonel I knew, and he and his family is like a second family to me. They're just really neat people, really neat people. And I went to see him when I was in Washington, and he offered to rent me a tux, and wanted me to go to. I was invited to Nixon's inauguration. I didn't go, and I wish I had, but I didn't want anything to do with any of them. They're just, to me, these people were unbelievable. They weren't what I expected, And I got invited to a Senate commission if I wanted to go to that, and you guys can't answer a question with a yes or no in your office. What are 4, 5, or 6 of you guys like? That would be a real fiasco, wouldn't it?
Would you have been just watching?
I wish I'd done it today, but back then, it was
would you have been watching them or giving testimony? Or
no, watch it, just observing.
Just to watch, yeah.
Oh my God, you don't want me giving testimony.
Yeah, right.
I'm not quiet, and I'm not shy, and I'm going to tell you how I feel, but may not be politically correct.
Yeah. Well, did you wind up doing that when you went over to Germany? Did you have to testify there, or were you just helping with the process?
Well, I had to testify, but it just dealt with what happened in Vietnam.
Right.
That was the extent of it. It got me to Germany. That's all I kept. I was a civilian. They treated me like a king. I was like, man, I was impressed. I said, darn, if they treated me like that in the service, I would have stayed in. But
now, when you went into
Germany was awesome.
Okay, well, when you went into the service, did you have the idea that you might stay there for a while, or did you figure you would just do your hitch and then go out the other end?
No.
And did anybody make an effort to get
Well, I really, part of it was to get the GI Bill, too. I mean, I knew I had to slow down, but I also knew my parents weren't J. Paul Getty, so, it would help to get some financial help for the military. And I don't know what you'd call it. It's not the oxymoron, it's not the word I'm looking for, but the bottom line was when you came back from overseas, you realized if you went back you went back to college, well, guess what? How are you going to handle a protest? Or how are you going to handle some of these things? If they find out you're a Vietnam vet, come on. This wasn't New Hampshire, so that's another thing I had to think about, do I put myself in that position? Because it just didn't appeal to me from that viewpoint, because I didn't know what I'd do.
Okay. Now, did anybody make an effort to encourage you to re-enlist?
Well, I think everybody gets the re-enlistment thing. They dangle a promotion in front of you. Then they go, well, you could work with the OSI, and then you have a civilian clothing allowance. Nobody knows what you do, really. It's got to be interesting. And then, and I said, you're not going 20 years out of war. It just didn't make sense to me. I didn't know how I just didn't think they could do it. We were in countries I never heard of. Give me a break. I'm from New Hampshire, My hometown was so small we didn't even have a town drunk. We had to take turns, and then I get to D.C. and we had a very good education. I lived 5 miles from Dartmouth, and so we got a tremendous education. But honest to God, I'm serious. I'm thinking to myself, where the heck is this? And we were in a lot of countries, like I said, that I just never heard of.
All right, so it wasn't staying wasn't terribly appealing then.
Well, it had its moments, let's put it that way. You know, but I don't know. I couldn't do it after D.C. I just didn't think it was worth it.
All right.
And you can't fight a war from Washington. They don't know what's going on.
All right. So then you're discharged in 1970 then? You finish?
Yeah.
Okay. And what did you do once you got out? Did you go back to school? Or?
Basically, the first thing I did is send resumes to publishing companies, because I had worked for a publishing company before I went in the service. But I was working for 84 Lumber, in Baltimore, because they were in 12 states. They're a pretty good growth company. And I thought, yeah, this is cool. But the thing is, I was dating a girl in Baltimore, and I kept thinking, this is kind of appealing. They've got a good growth record. But I looked at the manager and I realized the guy's 36 years old. He literally runs from 7 o'clock in the morning till they close. Is that the kind of life I really want? And the more I looked at it and the more I thought about it, I said, no, I don't think this isn't for me, because I'm not mechanical. So it was hard work for me to work at 84 Lumber. So anyway, I had an opportunity to go. I went back home, and I had got a hold of publishing companies, and I had a chance to go down to New York and interview the company, and I got assigned the Michigan territory.
And then were you a salesman at that point?
I was a regional sales manager, and I had Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. We had 11 guys covering the country. I had the largest wholesale in the world in Detroit, and some of the smallest. But I never realized Michigan was bigger than all of New England. I just, that conceptually, that just wasn't there in my mind, That's a lot of area, to cover. And kind of burns you out.
So how long did you do that?
I was brought out I was in Wall Lake somewhere around September, October, and moved into Grand Rapids in like January, February, something like that. Somewhere around that time.
But then how long did you stay in that job?
Oh, shoot, that was, I want to say till June or July the following year.
Okay, so not real long then.
It was too much. I mean, it was like, it was a lot of territory, but I said, you get your reports of your sales. I made the largest single sale ever sold in Western Publishing at the time. And I just sat there, I said, man, here's my roommate worked for a different division, but he's home every weekend, and I'd be out 2 weeks at a clip, and I'm like, you get your reports of your sales, but I can't be doing reports till 12, 1 in the morning, and then up at 4 or 5. I just can't do it anymore. So I was gone.
Now, what other kinds of things did you wind up doing?
Oh my gosh, you'd ask me that. That's a long time ago.
Well, I mean, are there particular jobs or lines
Western
of work?
Publishing, I had a guy approach me on a tennis court, called him Toulouse, but he was the manager for Farm Bureau. I ended up in the insurance industry. For Farm Bureau, I was an agent, and then I wrote group plans, for auto and health insurance type things, and so they asked me to go into corporate, so I worked in corporate, and I was with Farm Bureau, 71, 72. And then I got an opportunity to work as a department head for an independent agent in Muskegon. I joined them back in, I think it was about 73 to 78. Muskegon was great. But then my wife wanted to get back to Grand Rapids, so 78 we came back into Grand Rapids. And it's funny, I had all that time in the insurance business. Then after that I worked for, I want to say Snelling & Snelling, because they needed a manager's trainee.
Okay.
But unfortunately that was during a recession, which not cool. That was not, I want to say that was back, I don't know, maybe 80, I don't even remember anymore. But it was tough. I looked around and I realized the only people being placed were secretaries. And it's a commission job. I'm like, well, I ain't going to work, there's just nothing happening. And there were people longer period of work than that. They'd been with longer than I had. So, shoot, I'm trying to remember what I went from there. It's a tough one. It's 80. I'm trying to think. I worked for a company that sold energy products in home. That was straight commission. That was kind of tough. That was a tough market. People didn't have money. We really weren't into energy. So then I ended up working for a consulting firm. I did that for 16 years. Because small companies need help. I mean, it's just the big guys getting all the help in the world. The little guys not getting any help, and they're disappearing. 87% of this country is small business, and they're getting killed. People don't realize a Walmart comes into an area, how many small businesses they put out of, that they put out of business. It's wrong. What do we fight for? Our way of life is getting destroyed.
All right. Now, if you go and you look back at the time that you spent in the military, how do you think that affected you? Did it sort of teach you anything or change you at all?
My mother, when I came home, I mean, it's kind of funny, because I flew into Boston, and I must have taken a bus back to Lebanon or something. All I remember, she said, this was years later, but I remember my son went in and throws his jacket. I mean, he's only 5, 6 years old. Throws his jacket on the floor. My mother says, "You picked that up. Your father would never have done that. When he grew up, there was a place for everything, and everything had its place. And his room was spotless. And he would not throw a jacket on the floor. You hang it up right now." Of course, then he went to that Vietnam thing, and he came back a pig. But that, and this kid's like 5 or 6. I mean, this is my oldest son, but I'll never forget that. You don't think about it, but things, all of a sudden, things lose perspective. I mean, nothing's that important anymore. He might be dead tomorrow. Who knows? It's just the way it is. I mean, you can't explain it to anybody.
Right. Do you think you gained anything from the experience?
It's a good question. I think you gain more of an appreciation for life. An insight that, life is a tenuous thing. I think the other thing you gain is an insight into your government that you never should have gotten. It's better to walk around smart and happy and, oh, they must have found a birth certificate. We sit there and assume that our government's doing what's right, and they aren't. Yeah, they're doing what's, the phrase I heard in Maryland and Virginia was, they're feathering their own nest. I mean, that's just the way it is. That's another perspective you gain, and you don't want to believe it. You think that, I mean, if it was me, my society would come first over my personal feelings. My personal needs, they'd come last. The needs of society must be, they must be prevalent in everything you do in life. If you're a politician, you represent those people, take care of them. They have faith in you. You get to D.C. and it's like, they don't have a clue. I mean, and I didn't know. I honestly did not know. I just didn't expect that, I mean, what a shocker.
All right. Well, it makes for an interesting story and a little bit different one from some of the others that we get here. So I'd just like to close out here by thanking you for coming in and sharing it with me today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Air Force, it's not as dramatic.
Hey,
All
right. Well, that'll do it. Just turn the mics off, and we'll switch there on the top of it.
So anyway, I really didn't know what you were looking for.
Well, basically,
but it's just I'm not going to have.
No, we're not after.